Mortimer had just finished his shopping trip at the market, book in hand, and was happily heading home with his newly purchased products. Little did he know what awaited him along the way that day. As he was passing a rundown and abandoned lab, a strange sound caught his attention. Startled, Mortimer forced his gaze upward and saw something falling from the ceiling towards him. Before he could react, it had already made contact with his arm. He recoiled in horror, for what he had uncovered was far from a pleasant sight. It was a large metallic object smeared with rust and green goo, and upon closer inspection, it bore a symbol resembling that of a skull and crossbones. Strangely enough, the only thing that seemed to be running through Mortimer's mind at the time was the phrase, Experiment 666. The next thing he knew, there was a blinding light, and suddenly Mortimer was no more. To this day, he is said to haunt the old lab. People have seen a figure covered in leaves and dirt sitting in one of the chambers, apparently unmoving. Needless to say, only those brave enough to venture into the laboratory dare speak of what they saw. Whether the figure is truly alive or a ghost from the past is still a mystery, but one thing is certain. That figure is now appropriately known as Experiment 666. Roy was driving Pete's steamboat on a trip to the airport. About 7 miles later, he approached the mountains thinking it might be a shortcut, so he went the mountain way. After about 14 minutes, Roy had lost his way and had to hop off the steamboat and explore the mountains. As he climbed to the top of a mountain, Roy discovered an island that looked like something he saw in the 60s. He swam towards it and eventually made it onto the island. That's when he knew he was on Vietnam Island. He was curious and walked slowly around the rocks, passing by the body of Mason, who had also ventured there. A few minutes later, he was suddenly confronted by a fight that looked like him. The figure had no eyes and blood coming from them. Roy had become another unfortunate victim of the Vietnam War. In the grassy hills, there was a country club not too far off, and it was where Marcos, a happy and curious mouse, called home. He liked to watch TV, but he was often annoyed with his brother McGrawlo, who was always doing strange things. One day, Marcus decided to go for a nice stroll. And after a while, he stumbled upon an old-looking house, which turned out to be a trap. In the corner of the room, he noticed a note scrawled on a piece of paper that said, "Whoever reads this will be burning inside." Curious, Marcus took the note as a reminder and headed back to his clubhouse. When Marcus arrived, he was met with a gruesome sight. His house was on fire. In a daze, Marcus stumbled closer to the flames when out from the bushes McCrawler appeared and snapped his neck before Marcus could do anything. McCrawler then took Marcus' body to a nearby hill and left it there. As Marcus burned with the flames, McCrawler started to laugh manically, and the fire grew to a frightening intensity, until it had completely consumed the hill and Marcus' home. With nothing left, all that was left of Marcus was a charred and badly burnt corpse. For years now, Mortimer had been trapped in a chamber in an old lab under the name Experiment 666. People that visited the lab had reported to have been hearing banging on glass and strange noises. It had turned to be Mortimer, wanting to be let out and see the world again. But the townsfolk had been scared of what Mortimer was going to do. For a few days, he was acting like a hostile or feral animal, and some of the other experiments were acting similarly. But one day, it all changed. Someone was walking up to one of the chambers, but soon afterwards, a hand took them away. Mortimer let out a loud shriek and broke the glass. Mortimer had jumped out of a window, trying to find his home. Hours later, he found a forest and explored it, where he found some tents and decided to call the forest his new home. Mortimer would often go to the towns by the forest edge in search of food and supplies. He would go there not to harm anyone, but amicably. People were surprised by his intelligence and curiosity, and came to tolerate him. Mortimer eventually realized he could create his own shelter in his new home, the forest, using whatever odds and ends he could find around. He scavenged pieces of wood, old furniture, fabric and sticks, and with his hard work and determination, he created for himself a new home. Now, Mortimer lives happily in a shelter as part of no longer the Experiment 666. He still goes into town to scavenge for food and supplies, and the townsfolk welcome him now with open arms. Despite all the obstacles, Mortimer has been able to make the best of his new home. He will forever be remembered as an example of resilience, intelligence, determination, and never giving up hope. Mortimer sat in his tent, deep in the forest, and pondered the memories of his twin brother, Market Mouse. Market Mouse was known for often visiting the market, which is where he got his name from. People described him as weird, as he would frequently sit inside and do nothing, yet also sit outside and enjoy the trees at times. Mortimer recently heard news of what had happened to him from a video that was recorded by a random person. In the video, it was nighttime and Market Mouse was walking back home through the forest when he noticed a tunnel. This prompted the recording person to hide behind a tree. Market Mouse entered the tunnel, and screaming was heard as he seemed to fall into darkness. The person followed, and when the video reached the 26-minute mark, Market Mouse had busted through a ceiling and had landed on carpet. After this, he slowly explored the area and soon found a computer with security cameras and an exit that wouldn't work. The 2-hour video has stirred conversations of what has happened to Market Mouse. Some said he snapped out of reality. Others say that he was eaten by something living in the chamber. The fate of the beloved twin brother remained a mystery, and delved deep into Mortimer's thoughts as he sat in his tent in the forest. Once upon a time, there lived a young boy who was a huge Mickey Mouse fan. He loved to watch Mickey Mouse cartoons and had even created a wooden pad upon which he had been making sketches. The young boy had been harboring a dream of creating his own cartoons, but he couldn't seem to come up with any ideas. One day, he wrote on the wooden pad in black marker, "Father, I crave cheddar." The boy's pet mouse was also growing up with him, but sadly passed away some time later. When the boy was older and looked back to his wooden pad, he had forgotten why he had written the words, "Father, I crave cheddar" in the first place. He decided to go to his friend's house to get some ideas for his cartoons. When they arrived at the house, one of the desk drawers randomly opened and an arm came out, turning on a lamp. Everyone was surprised to find that the arm belonged to the boy's pet mouse. The mouse's arms and legs were long and string-like while its eyes were large, but its pupils were still small. It climbed out the window and waited outside. When the boy and his friends stepped outside, they saw the string-like mouse and stepped back, thinking it was harmless. The boy and his friends finally got some ideas for a cartoon, but none of them fit quite right. Then the boy's pet mouse came up with the perfect idea and gave it to the boy. And that's how the boy was finally able to finish his cartoon and fulfill his dream. Sad Mouse was feeling exhausted from walking for hours. Dejected and alone, he stumbled upon a tree in the forest and sat down to rest and started talking to it while rocking back and forth, feeling more desolate than ever before. He was about to give up all hope until suddenly he felt a gentle hand on his shoulder. Looking up, he saw Mortimer, a kind old mouse from the forest. Mortimer, sensing Sad Mouse's despondency, gently ushered him to his tent, a home in the middle of the dark forest. Once inside, Mortimer offered Sad Mouse some roasted marshmallows as they began to talk about Market Mouse, another mouse from these parts, and what had become of him. Sad Mouse was beginning to feel better, no longer feeling so isolated, and he began to tell Mortimer about how he had been walking past some buildings for hours in desperation and just wanted to get away from it all. After exchanging stories, Mortimer settled Sad Mouse for the night in the tent, and they both drifted off to sleep. The next morning, they walked together to the same buildings that Sad Mouse had been walking by the night before. As they arrived, Sad Mouse suddenly felt a strange sensation, and before he knew it, his consciousness vanished, and he felt himself soaring through the air as if he had the power to control his movements. Then, everything went pitch black. Sad Mouse woke up, feeling confused and uncomfortable in his unknown surroundings. Looking around, he noticed two chambers. One with a deformed mouse head, and one with a crazed mouse. He could hear, but not see someone else in Dicamba beside him. It was Mortimer, crawling around the chamber, banging on glass, making weird noises and acting like a feral animal. Minnie then suddenly walked up to Sad Mouse and he froze, unsure of what to do. Suddenly, an unknown scientist grabbed her by the arm and took her away. Horrified, Mortimer started to bang on the glass that separated them and let out a loud cry. The glass shattered from the force and both Sad Mouse and Mortimer were let out. Acting on an instinct not known to him, Sad Mouse followed Mortimer as he jumped out the window, escaping the chambers. Passing through nearby streets, the duo ventured off to a nearby market. Sad Mouse quickly gathered a few pills and followed Mortimer into the forest. He had been walking past this forest before, occasionally talking to the trees, with no plan in mind. He decided to take one of the pills and set up a tent to rest in. Meanwhile, Mortimer had grown normal now, and was heading into town to get supplies, and to see the townsfolk after being trapped in a chamber for years. Sad Mouse soon went to sleep inside a tent, but that's when things went wrong. Suddenly, he found himself floating, his body going through the floor like a ghost, and he landed in a red void. A desk appeared out of nowhere. And the devil himself materialized in front of him. The devil explained that Sad Mouse had done something wrong in order for him to be in this situation. And some demon guards then came and picked him up. He was going to be sacrificed to the devil. To Sad Mouse's horror, they guided him towards a large burning hole in the floor. But before he was thrown in, he awoke, back in his tent. It was all a hallucination. At that moment, he felt like he couldn't take it anymore, running around the forest in a frantic attempt to escape the void he had just seen. Sad Mouse became overwhelmed and exhausted. Mortimer suddenly heard a crash and went to investigate. To his shock, he saw a pile of rocks, and underneath it, Sad Mouse's disembodied head, covered in blood. Brought down by his own insanity, Sad Mouse had finally taken his own life. Mortimer sadly buried him in the forest close to his tents, filled with grief and disbelief. Ever since McGrawlo burned down Marcus's house, he's been wanted, but he also rebuilt his house, but it now looks like him. One night, when he was watching TV, he saw news about an abandoned warehouse named Treasure Island. This caught the attention of McGrawlo, so he exited his house, trying to find it. On his way, he passed the dark house he left for Marcus to discover while McGrawlo burnt down his house. He finally found the warehouse. It was smaller than he expected. He entered the dark building. Later, he saw a bunch of on the ceiling and on the ground, although he wasn't sure what it was made of. In another room, he found a head and a poster of him. He soon found a poster of a McGrawlo was confused of the warehouse and was wondering. On his way out, he saw
boxes covering it. He wondered if the warehouse had a secret and walked into the
Ever since McGrawler walked into the Treasure Island, he hasn't been seen since. Some people have claimed to have seen one of Treasure Island's well-known characters boarding up the sign and shutting the door. The story got into a newspaper, which is how Marcus knew about why McGrawler hasn't been in his house. As it turns out, Marcus wasn't actually dead. He was just severely burnt. After being in the hospital for a few days, he was back to normal, but he did get on the way. When he arrived inside his house, he saw coming to visit. But when he entered, he saw two clubhouses, one red and one yellow. He was confused and slowly walked around. Suddenly, without warning, a weirdly colored Marcus jumped out at him, greeted him, and asked him if he was ready for an adventure. It was like he was in a kids' show. Marco was confused and slowly walked backwards. Marcus kept asking him questions, causing Marco to run away. He then hit a hard blue wall and fainted. Marcus was confused, but had an idea. He put Marco on a wall of the yellow clubhouse, got some yellow paint, and painted Marco yellow completely. But little did he know, he was actually hallucinating and painting various things in his wall, and he was painting a book yellow. Marcus's brain had actually been treated on in the hospital. It's October, and Marcus decided to celebrate. He had an idea of dressing up, so he decided to go to the market. When he got there, he saw a Halloween poster. He felt happy that someone else was celebrating and went inside. Inside, he saw a Market Mouse poster. The market was small. He eventually saw a jack-o'-lantern sitting on a shelf. He grabbed it, sat down, and carved it. Marcus put it on his head and walked out. On his way, he passed a neighborhood and scared a few people. Marcus even made evil ghostly noises. He eventually found his way home. But when he opened the door, he found something unexpected. Someone wearing a Jason Voorhees mask jumped out at him as Marcus opened the door. He walked closer to Marcus. Marcus walked backwards. Marcus was cornered, and the person walked closer. But when he was just about to stab Marcus, he opened his mask, revealing Marco in a Jason Voorhees costume. Marcus was confused, but the two eventually laughed it off. They talked about Marcus's colorful accident and went inside Marcus's clubhouse to hang out. Mortimer was deeply in sorrow about the passing of his friend, said Mouse. He had also been sleeping in his tent for a month. The forest had been getting refurbished. Mortimer didn't notice. When he woke up, he didn't notice anything first, but when he started looking around, he started to notice the difference. He was interested, but he had started getting bored of living in the forest. He wanted to find a new home. One day, he decided to do it. Once he started, he saw something that wasn't there before, a road. He felt interested and decided to go on it. Mortimer had been living in the forest for so long, he had forgotten about his old home. After a while of walking, he started to think about sad Mouse. He felt sad. Soon enough, he saw a scratched-up sign. He felt curious, but also felt worried of the old lab. Mortimer let curiosity beat him and walked along it. But what it was leading to was the least expected thing he had expected. It was a farm. He was suspicious at first, but eventually grew to it. Mortimer placed a poster of him and grew happy. Mortimer decided to call the farm his new home and replaced the sign leading to it.